Hello and welcome to another episode of Borderlands, Stories from Ukraine. I'm here with Dave and Glenn. We hope will be joining us, but he's busy with important people right now, as he says. And Glenn is a well-known security expert in this region, so we'll respect that, and hopefully he comes on. But Dave, just wanted to do a couple things. First of all, welcome everyone to the this regular update that we've been doing on the situation in Ukraine. I just wanted to take a few moments to update everyone who's watched this what the Borderlands Foundation is and what we're doing. I've spent the last few weeks in Washington, D.C., and one of the things that we're working on right now is turning the Borderlands Foundation into a historical Ukrainian war historical foundation or think tank that will help us to study in depth the impacts of the war on society in Ukraine, but also the lessons for that in the future for the U.S. Army or U.S., Ukraine, and really all the Western militaries that I think should really learn the lessons from this. So this is one of the things that Foundation does, or we're working on doing, is setting up a historical center. I'm going to go move back to Ukraine in the next, hopefully, month, get there in early June and see if we can get set up there. I'm working on a documentary about the war as an executive producer on a project, and also want to start writing some early drafts of the history of the war for lessons learned. So that's one of the things we're doing. The other thing we do at the Borderlands Foundation is we've created an app that's actually working. If you go to our site, where you can donate to real Ukrainians in need impacted by the war, that's where we want our charitable giving for people who appreciate the content that you get from the foundation in terms of these broadcasts and articles that we'll write in the future. And just wanted to update everyone on that and what we're doing. So Dave, things are, I wouldn't say slowing down by any stretch for the soldiers that are on the front line. This is absolutely intense fighting, but from the Western media perspective, I would say the interest or the amount of footage or the amount of news coverage, Twitter streams are certainly declining, which I think is natural. Unfortunately, in the West, is we have a short attention span. But what I wanted to do today was really take a step back with you, Dave, and examine where we are in the war and what's coming up this summer, because I'm actually going to have to take at least a few weeks break from producing content. I'm getting married next week to Katya, my fiance from Ukraine, and then after that we'll be doing a little bit of traveling and getting set up back in Ukraine. But I wanted to really use this time to reflect back on what's happened, but more importantly, where we are right now and what could happen in the summer. And again, as Michael Kaufman, the top Russia expert in the United States, probably the world, actually, Russian military expert outside of Russia, at least. And I don't know how well.
There's no experts in Russia. It's okay.
Yeah, there's certainly no experts in Russia, but he likes to say, I just met him in D.C. and spent some time with him. He says everything in war is contingent. So it's really everything's unpredictable. That's the beauty of history, is how crazy it is in terms of when you look back at what's happened. So as a historian, we much prefer to look at what happened and tell neat stories about it rather than predict. But I do think for those who follow this broadcast or this podcast, that it's important for us to look at where we are. So let's go through the agenda for today. And I really wanted to talk about first and foremost, Dave, a counteroffensive that started to pick up steam. Actually, really has about a week ago, right when we'll get to Victory Day in a moment, Russian Victory Day, but right as Vladimir Putin was supposedly celebrating Victory Day in Russia, Ukraine launched a massive counteroffensive, and that has started and gone quite well. In fact, Ukraine has basically broken the siege of Kharkiv, which was never a full siege. Kharkiv was never surrounded, but it certainly was bombarded by artillery and rockets every day. And the Ukrainian armed forces have launched what seems to be a very coordinated counteroffensive around Kharkiv, but also pushing towards Izium, which is south of Kharkiv and threatens the Donbas region. And Dave, just wanted to get your thoughts and reflections on what's going on up there, and how important this second, aside from outside of Kiev and northern Ukraine, now a second coordinated counteroffensive, which a lot of people would argue that the counteroffensive around Kiev and Sumy and those regions was actually a very well organized Russian retreat, which obviously the Ukrainians pressured them out on all fronts. But what's your read on the current counteroffensive in Kharkiv, Dave, and what's happened?
Yeah, I'll start out with saying that no one needs to confuse the pace of the strategic and operational level of war with the violence that still happens at the tactical level, right? And that's what you started off with, right? It is moving slow strategically and operationally, but tactically there are still violent engagements and battles being fought. But the campaigns, the operations are moving rather slow. For the most part, Kharkiv being an exception right now. There will probably be another exception in about a week, because that seems to be the flow. So, yeah, Kiev's really a withdrawal under pressure is what we'd call that, doctrinally, where Russia they were withdrawing and being pushed out as well. Kharkiv, I think, was a little bit different. I think you had Russia didn't necessarily want to withdraw there, but they were pushed out. And what I think happened is you had a confluence of events happen. Ukraine was able to reallocate combat power. There is support from the West that came in, and it looks like that's where a lot of that was initially allocated. That really helped shape the fight. And it looks like upwards of 19 BTGs pushed out of Ukraine and back into Russia. So some estimates I've seen, there are only 3 Russian BTGs still in Ukraine in that area holding on. And that's probably just securing a couple lines of communication for Russia to get all their stuff out. So some questions I would have about that is, what do those Russian BTGs look like? We know logistically they were already challenged. So what are the effects of some of the new equipment that got in and was put into use a lot faster than I thought it would, by a couple weeks. So it's, what difference did that make, in the battlefield, geometry, and battlefield effects that help shape that up there. And then what's Russia going to do with those units? That's the big question I have. Can they reconstitute them? Probably not. Can they reorganize and piecemeal them back together? Probably. and reconstitute them further in the east, southeast, more near Donetsk. I think what also is happening here, this is starting to roll the Russian line. Because right now it looks like Izium's probably going to be the next push from Ukraine, and that's going to roll, and Russia's going to roll out of there as well. So ultimately, does this cause Russia to readdress their aim and limit their scope even more? So that's a couple things I've been looking at around the Kharkiv area with the very successful counterattack that happened over the past 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, Dave, that's been brought up by American intelligence and a lot of analysts is allegedly there's 93 BTGs in Ukraine, but no one knows really what a BTG means anymore in terms of real combat power, whether that's
Correct.
a company or 2 companies, but certainly they're not full strength battalion tactical groups, and it's very hard to use those as a measure of combat power. And I think the 19 BTGs you're talking about were actually BTGs that were in Belgorod already that are reconstituting, and around Kharkiv there might have been 4 or 5 that were pushed out, with a lot of obviously artillery supporting them that were pushed out. But what's interesting is those 19 BTGs, battalion tactical groups that are in Belgorod, have not come down to the rescue, have not counterattacked, have not really done anything. So the question is, what's the state of those 19 battalion tactical groups that are probably being reconstituted? And what Kharkiv being relieved does is, the major significance is it basically takes, just like when they retreated from Kiev, it takes the Russian artillery and even rocket artillery out of the range of being able to shell the city, which relieves a tremendous amount of pressure on Kharkiv, both the residential areas, but any defense industry that's going on there, which there are certainly. There's a lot of industry in Kharkiv too. And then it also allows Ukraine to start putting pressure, because they've basically gone all the way up to the Svirty Donetsk River, which is allows them to now start pressuring the supply lines with artillery, ground lines of communication that are supplying Russian forces in Izium. And last week, allegedly, General Gerasimov was in Izium. There was a command post that was destroyed by Ukrainian rocket fire, which they speculated General Gerasimov was there. They said he was potentially wounded, lightly wounded in that attack. Now, there's no confirmation that he was wounded, but interestingly enough, after that rocket attack, there have been no further advances from Izium. There's even been a shifting of Russian combat power, it seems, to the east around Popasna and Severodonetsk, these fortress towns that are farther to the east. And it seems like you're right, Izium could be the next area that is attacked in a large coordinated manner. And there already have been Ukrainian counterattacks around Izium, but it looks like the pressure on that will continue to build. And then moving to the east, we had one major town fall, or let's say a very organized retreat from that town of Popasna, where Wagner and Chechen Wagner mercenaries, which is Russian private army, and some Chechen forces, which who knows if they're fighting, but they're certainly taking TikTok videos. We're
lots of them.
Yeah, we're in the town of Popasna, and Ukrainians set up an alternate fallback defensive position that's apparently fortified from there. And it seems, and this is one of the big questions of today, is at what point is the Russian offensive going to culminate here? Meaning they've basically not been able to hold Kharkiv, are under pressure around Izium, that entire axis. And there's some very small gains near Lyman and Popasna, and pressure still being applied around Severodonetsk. But it seems like the momentum is going out of the Russian offensive. And actually, one story that came out this week was about a Russian bridging operation where apparently 73 armored vehicles and tanks, basically an entire battalion plus maybe 2 battalions worth of equipment.
Yeah, it's close to 2.
Yeah, was destroyed by Ukrainian artillery, and there could have been hundreds. There's even speculation of up to 1,500 casualties in that one large battle, which was near the line. Bilohorivka, I think it's near Severodonetsk area. So even in the area where the Russians are really pushing, they're having some major setbacks, and now these M777s, the American towed artillery, are finally getting into theater. There's first footage of them being used, and Russian artillery is now being outranged and I'm sure outgunned by the Ukrainian artillery, which is a huge turn of events, because Russians to this point have really only been able to win on the artillery front. They just have a lot more artillery pieces organically in their army, and they shoot a lot, and that makes up for their lack of infantry. So, Dave, what are your thoughts on what's going on in the main battle zone now in Donbas?
Yeah, and and when you talk artillery with Russia, that's something we've always known, and we've always really accepted that. Russia has lots of artillery, not necessarily good, but volume makes up for quality. That's just what we've always expected. I find it interesting that I shouldn't at this point, that Russia continues to do very simple tactical tasks poorly, and they continue to fail to have any kind of local security. That bridge crossing, and there's video of it, from Ukrainian unmanned aerial systems. There's no near side security. There's no far side security on that river crossing. Nothing. Just put in the bridge and think you're going to drive across it in Ukrainian territory. It's still mind-boggling to me that lesson is, after almost 3 months of this conflict, Russia hasn't figured out that they need to have security at any level. They don't have it at any level. And it just opens themselves up. And that was a direct fire attack. That wasn't even, unmanned aerial system shooting, missiles. That was a surface attack, direct fire.
Well, I think it was a lot of artillery, some Air Force, and of course some Ukrainian. Yeah. There was Ukrainian forces basically brought in. First of all, apparently an engineer who posted about this on Twitter said they guessed correctly where the bridge crossing would be, so they pre-sighted in artillery. It was a foggy day. The Russians were doing a lot of things right, like trying to obscure with smoke and other things, but the Ukrainian engineers had guessed the right location and brought in a huge amount of artillery. And I think what you're seeing here, and what's really important, is the Russian Air Force is obviously more numerous than Ukraine's, but they still not achieved air superiority to the point where they can really support ground operations well. On the other hand, I would say that the Ukrainians have achieved much more drone superiority at the lower tactical and operational drone level. And what those drones allow them to do is sight in artillery, call it in, adjust it. And now that their artillery pieces outrange the Russians by a good 9 kilometers, they can really take the fight to the Russians and beat them at their own game, which is artillery. And this isn't mass artillery, but it's well sighted.
It's
precision artillery with great surveillance and reconnaissance with drones, which, Dave, back in the old days, we didn't have that when we were lieutenants. We counted on ourselves and vehicles and individuals to spot artillery.
But now, you would never shoot on observed. That we would, 15, 20 years ago, we would consider that an unobserved fire.
Yeah.
Even though you can see it through a drone.
Exactly.
And it's giving you a 10-digit grid.
Yeah.
In 4K high definition. That would still be an unobserved fire 20 years ago.
And that's what's really changed here is I was talking with Michael Kaufman from the Center for Naval Analysis, and there's been all this noise about javelins and the new T-90 Russian tanks that are coming onto the battlefield, and all of these different and they're getting destroyed, and all these other things, but ultimately this is a old-fashioned artillery war, which that's why they call artillery king of battle. It really can and usually does in conventional fights cause the most casualties, and your success in managing your artillery, which is getting it onto the battlefield, getting it supplied with enough rounds, which is the main challenge for Ukraine. Being, let's say, everyone has a limited amount, no one has unlimited amounts of artillery ammo, although the Russians seem to have a lot more, but you shouldn't waste it. And the Ukrainians seem to be making much better use of the artillery they do have with drones and other ways that they're able to call in artillery, mainly with drones, I think, to really keep the Russians on their back foot. And that's where it looks like the battle of the Donbas, as it's being called right now, is going to be determined by the effectiveness and the supplies of artillery. And the drones and the artillery, those two together, I think are going to be decisive in this fight.
Yeah, and I think the big difference here is when you talk the ineffectiveness of the Russian Air Force, I think it's because it's not integrated with ground movement and maneuver. They're not mutually supporting. Russia's artillery is not. They're working separate. Even the artillery and their armor and the infantry, the close air support, they're all working separate. They all have. It's all separate stovepipes. Nothing's junctioning together. On the Ukrainian side, you're seeing very effective indirect fires because you're seeing the IPB. The Ukrainian engineer says, hey, we guessed right. Well, you guessed right because he probably did a terrain analysis. He's an engineer boat guy, right? He knows that river. There's only so many places where you can actually cross and put a float bridge in where you have a near and a far side anchor that's good enough to get armored vehicles on that float bridge and across, right? So there's intelligence preparation to the battlefield happening on the Ukrainian side, which enables them to, build some targets and target groups for artillery, right? And they're 777s, so they're digital. So they probably also have the fire control systems, right? So they've got the targets already input into these. and they have multiple targets, right, based on their IPB. So it's not that hard to shift those guns onto those targets and start firing, because they have ballistic data, they have firing data to shoot those targets. So even if they're not exactly on there, they can get to them pretty quickly with the 777. Vice an older system that's more manual, right? The 777, you still have to move it to a degree, right? But the computer does a lot of the targeting for you, as long as you're within a certain deviation off the target line. So I think that's the integration is really what's making a difference on Ukraine's side right now, and the control on the Russian side is to their decrement.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're just seeing now, just to temper what I'm hearing also from people that I know on the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian forces are taking a lot of casualties. This is a tough fight. The Russians have learned a lot from their original mistakes. They're moving very cautiously. They're trying to make up for the lack of manpower that because of all the people they've lost with a lot of artillery. But ultimately, what's happening is the Ukrainian forces are still seem to be out fighting at the tactical level, the Russian forces, and are therefore able to win small tactical engagements that start to add up. And that's really the thing that seems to be happening right now. And you should see an acceleration of that with these new artillery systems that are just now getting onto the battlefield, and the acceleration of their integration with drones, which the Ukrainians seem to have become much better at, whether it's quantity of small commercial drones that they're getting, or some of the other higher level drones, Bayraktars and others. The Ukrainians definitely seem to be more adept at the way the fight's evolving, and that's why you're seeing such a big emphasis on these artillery pieces. Germany sending with Netherlands 12 of their self-propelled howitzers, the 2000s. So if he puts that out on Twitter and links to both of them, the podcast and the app, then that could get a lot of traffic, right? And the same thing with all these people that he can put me in touch with, and others that we will interview, where we just become a really important thoughtful discussion of Ukraine on the podcast. And this does not preclude interviewing people who aren't well known too. We're not just going to interview really well known people. We want regular stories of regular people too, so they can become known if their stories are interesting and people want to follow up with them. But the key to the podcast strategy is getting a bunch of people at the beginning, especially, who, when they tweet out the recording with really good videos of them from the podcast, that it gets some really good traction. They're training Ukraine on that. So really the emphasis now is becoming on the artillery fight. Now, Dave, let's move to the south, where we still have a very, very static line overall. North of Mariupol in the southern Donbas, there's a line heading towards the Dnieper River. On the other side of the Dnieper River, you have the Russian forces near up north of Kherson, trying to hold on with a very tough line, Ukrainian line between Mykolaiv and Kherson. And the main thing that's still there is, as we talked about several weeks ago now, is Mariupol, the Azovstal. Azovstal is still holding out. Apparently, has still. First of all, great news was there was an evacuation of the civilians that were in there. So that was something positive that came from the UN mediation, I guess, them and the International Red Cross. The fighters in there, I think, repelled right before Victory Day an assault inside the plants. So they're still holding on, but there's been multiple bombings and artillery barrages that have apparently collapsed a couple of key parts of the bunker system. I think 2 hospitals now have been hit. Soldiers are running out of basic medical supplies, are gone. Who knows what the real situation is on food and water. But as we talked about earlier, that this area doesn't seem to be breakable from an assault perspective. I think Russia left 2 battalion tactical groups in Mariupol, and maybe some troops there to supervise cleanup. But it seems like that garrison is holding, and they're still holding out hope that there can be a prisoner exchange where these troops get sent to a third country for the duration of the war, and some Russian prisoners get released. But that's what's happening in Mariupol, and then the line around Kherson, and one of the really tough things that's happening for people inside Kherson and these occupied cities is the potential pending annexation of these territories into Russia. They were trying, rumor had it, they were trying to organize some sham referendums, and those have not even been successful. There's posters up around Kherson where some level of resistance is forming to the collaboration government, which there are some local collaborators from pro-Russian parties that politicians, but very tense. A lot of people apparently who are supportive of Ukraine or have military background or connections to the government are being abducted and tortured. And it seems like with the Russian political elite that have traveled down there, that they're very anxious to declare Kherson, parts of Zaporizhia and the Donbas part of Russia. And here's why that's important, because Russian nuclear doctrine says that Russia will not attack anything, will not use nuclear weapons unless the existence of their state is threatened. And by incorporating some of these territories into Russia, as illegal as it may be and unlegitimate among most of the people in the world's eyes, that could provide some pretext for escalation should Putin choose to do that. But what are your thoughts on what's going on in the South, Dave, and the fight down there?
I'm just really impressed with you, with the Marine Brigade and Azov and Mariupol. And when Russia launched that last major offensive at the steel plant, and committed a lot of combat power, a lot of artillery, and a lot of their air power, you really had a feeling that it was ultimately going to break. And enable Russia to actually enter and start clearing it out, and it didn't happen. So just the will of those units, those Ukrainian units there, that hold off probably Russia's best coordinated assault, really so far, and repel it, and not only repel it, but reestablish their security and their defensive posture. But like you said, that came at a really significant cost in terms of all their classes of supply. And if you see the pictures, because those guys have internet access still, right? Their phones are still working, and you've seen pictures of them. They're looking rough. It is really rough, and that's the one thing I think about when I think about Mariupol is how long can the human will withstand? And they've gone 77 days now. But man, it's rough, very rough for them, right? And so the violence at the tactical level is still incredibly violent. But on the flip side, Russia has really looking at two PTGs, some Chechens, and some Russian Spetsnaz in and around the city. They don't really control the city. Russia really has no significant control over the city at this point. And I think ultimately it just comes back to, I think Russia is going to redefine their strategic aim, and moving some combat power around to do that again. So I think they're holding out fine there. Further west, acknowledge a nuclear doctrine. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you move on from Mariupol, I wanted to just reflect on a few things there. I think from a strategic level, it's hard to understate the significance of that garrison. And if you look back through history, remember the Alamo, or the 300 at Thermopylae. This is one of those chapters in military history that if that garrison had not done and continues to do what they continue to do, this war would have really been a lot different. You could have seen a huge envelopment potentially materialize of the entire joint forces command that the Ukrainian army had there, and the fact that so many forces were pinned down for so long and took so many casualties in Mariupol, and still have to worry about that garrison is hugely significant, not just militarily, but I think morally, spiritually for Ukrainian people, where this will be I think a foundation of Ukrainian identity going forward in a way that's extraordinarily powerful. And I think these soldiers definitely know that. They know that what they're doing could well cost them their lives, but it's going to probably play a huge role in saving Ukraine as a country and establishing the future. And it's massive, and it's something that I think it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around, even those who've served before. You never know what you're going to do in a situation until you face it. But we all hope that we would just come close to what they're doing in that situation. And we're still looking for a miracle there. And we know that President Zelensky and his administration are really working on that as one of their top priorities, even though militarily now the significance of what's happening is gone down a lot. I think the moral, spiritual significance of it keeps going up for Ukraine. So, but it's a huge. It wasn't captured by May 9th. There was no big parade there, as a lot of people thought there would be, and it's still holding out. And I think this goes towards what we'll talk about at the end, which is May 9th, big letdown, Victory Day, and President Putin's, I think, crashing into reality is really important. What's going on? So moving on to the west of there, Dave. Anything from the other side of the Dnieper River?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's moved the slowest. Probably over the past week. Nothing's really operationally, strategically has really happened out there. Even tactically, it's more of an artillery slug out rather than ground forces maneuvering, and lines aren't moving. The lines have stayed pretty constant for 2 weeks with indirect fires going back and forth. And the interesting part is over on the Moldova border with Transnistria and a little bit more saber rattling coming out of Moldova, out of Transnistria. And obviously it's right there next to Odessa. So everyone's still paying close attention to that. But I think Odessa, for me, continues to be the biggest surprise, that Odessa is still, plainly Ukrainian, right? So, some Russian missile attacks from the sea, still happening, but that's, the volume of that is decreased as well.
Well, Snake Island is another episode of apparently 2 Russian patrol boats and a helicopter of special forces and a couple air defense batteries were casualties of the fighting at Snake Island. And Snake Island's really important because it's literally just a rock. I mean, it's hard to call it an island. It's a big argument between Romania and Ukraine if it counts as an island or not. But from the Glenn,
I'm here.
We were just finishing discussing Snake Island here and what's going on there. We already made our way around, but Glenn, I wanted to bring you in because I've got some travel ahead of me. So this is going to be probably our last broadcast for a while. And I wanted to just get with you and Dave and zoom out to the strategic level a bit around May 9th and Putin's anticlimactic day. His Gerasimov wasn't even there. I don't know if that meant he's wounded or out of favor, but he didn't show up for his own victory parade for the Russian armed forces. And Russia's now apparently about to or trying to prepare the ground for annexation of Kherson and all these areas that they've conquered, Zaporizhia, southern Zaporizhia, and Kherson, and the Donbas, and they've been kicked out of or getting kicked out of Kharkiv Oblast. And Ukraine has now stated that all territory will be recovered is their war aims, whereas at the beginning Zelensky was a little bit softer on territorial claims. It looks like war aims are getting very hard on both sides, and Ukraine is starting to get some momentum around Kharkiv. Glenn, where do you see things from your side? I know you've been following things closely. I just wanted to get your overall summary after, before we go into what do you think the summer is going to bring here, because we're going to have a break here for a little while before we do one of these again.
It's interesting because I'm not sure why Kharkiv was chosen for sort of you could say the counterattack, Kharkiv area, whether that was just where it happened. My suspicion is that is where it happened, not that it was a focused choice. Because frankly, if I was going to go anywhere in strategic terms, I'd go south, because the big problem is, as you say, is the Russian attempts to annex the whole of the south area and claim it as being Russia, and that's a worrying thing, because if they claim it as being Russia, then I am sure that some of the international countries will go weak on this, like Germany and France, and let Russia keep the ground that it's got and try and persuade Zelensky that well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. Let them have this area for now, and then try and get it back later, which will be extremely dangerous, because once you've given Russia something, you're not going to get it back unless you fight for it. We have the evidence from that from Georgia, Moldova, and everywhere, Syria, and everywhere else they are. So I think this is a really dangerous time for Ukraine at the moment, and that it can't afford to not focus on the main tasks and hit the main areas of, and basically, in my mind, get into Crimea, because I think if they get into Crimea, then the whole thing will unravel. If they just try and fight bit by bit by bit, like Ukraine, like in Kharkiv, and then a little bit south and another little bit south, then they could be there forever. They've got to actually to break the will and break the morale of the Russian armed forces somewhere where it really hurts. Kharkiv is obviously not it, but that's what they're doing. So that is where they are. I read that they are taking troops from the east, the Donbas area, to take them up to Kharkiv to retry and take back the land that they've got in Kharkiv. And obviously they want to do that because that area to the southeast of Kharkiv is the main supply route to Izium, where they're actually fighting quite hard at the moment. And there's something like, if you believe the pictures that there are there, there's maybe 8 or 12 battalion groups, possibly even more, around Izium, waiting to attack south. And so any chance to break for the Ukrainians to break the supply lines to that could actually be fatal for the Russian forces in Izium, because if you've got 12 battalion groups, that's an awful lot of food you need. It's an awful lot of ammunition you need. It's an awful lot of fuel you need. And that's not something you can do in 5 minutes. It's a serious activity. So if they manage to actually to start destroying trucks coming in on that line down to Izium, it's the sort of thing that could actually break the forces in Izium quite easily. Jumping down to Mariupol, I mean, Mariupol is in shitty state, and people are trying to get the injured military out, but I don't think Russia's going to let them. I mean, I think Russia's aim is to kill every member of Azov that they can, or parade them on the Red Square as the evil Nazis. I just don't see that anything that comes out of Kiev or the United Nations towards getting these guys out is going to work, because it's politically dynamite for Ukraine, for government to let any of the Azov battalion back into Ukraine, because they're going to actually to talk, they're going to be aggressive, they're going to be political. And so I just don't see that Kiev wants that to happen. This is a really, really difficult time in that respect. And it's politically a very difficult time for the government at the moment, because a lot more people now are questioning why troops got out of Crimea, why there was no work done to prepare the army in the last 2 years. And I think those are the things that we actually need to look at the moment, because this political background is the dynamite that could actually upset the whole battle, left or right.
Mm-hmm. Well, Glenn, we'd gone through a lot of those areas, and thank you for jumping in and contributing on each one of them. I want to go to the issue of May 9th and the pending summer season, where maneuver is going to become much more feasible with off-road, with tanks as the spring mud clears up. And there was a lot of speculation about some kind of declaration of war or mobilization, and that didn't happen on May 9th. And it's clear that Putin doesn't seem to want to mobilize, because it would admit failure in his special military operation. Where do you see this going in terms of both the stated war aims of Russia, but their activities, and the same thing with Ukraine in terms of their stated war aims keep getting bigger, which is hard to walk back from, and where is Ukraine militarily in terms of raising more manpower, equipping them, and where could they apply that?
All right. Well, starting with Ukraine, I mean, the challenge with Ukraine is training, and training more human beings to actually to join the forces. I mean, they're losing a lot of people killed. There's no question, and you've got to replace those, and that means actually bringing people to the front line that are trained. You can't just bring butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers to the front line and expect them to be competent. They'll be brave. Of course, they'll be brave because they're Ukrainian, but they won't necessarily be competent. They won't know how to do night patrolling. They won't know how to do ambushes. They won't know how to do withdrawals and attacks and everything else, unless you actually give them proper training. So there's a fundamental problem here for the Ukrainians in setting up a training organization to deal with the 500,000, 600,000 people they've put into the volunteer forces that haven't had any training at all. And if they keep increasing their war aims, fine, you can manage with when you've got new equipment and everything else, but you've still got to have more manpower, because you're still going to lose manpower no matter how clever you are and whatever you do. So that's a big thing they've got to deal with. The Russians, I mean, this is really strange with the Russians. I mean, if Putin looks as though what he's going to try and do is devious methods to actually to get people into the army. So you can't do big mobilization because, as you accurately said, this just highlights the failure of his system. So he's got to actually to have things of persuading people by money, persuade by, you must help the great Russia in this, whatever. But whatever he does, he's got the same problem. Unless you train people properly, when you send them to the front line, they fail. And we're seeing with the Russians a huge amount of failure at the moment, and people giving up and putting their hands up, and and officers dying in large numbers because they're simply not trained to do what they're doing. They're simply not have not got the skills for coordinated battle actions. They can go in man to man and fight, but what they can't do is all the things that in the British or American or German military we learn to do as officers and troops, and that we practice how to do the more sophisticated operational activities. They don't have this. And so whatever he does, if he's not got people to train these people properly, he will pull them forward, and the numbers may increase, and they may have lots more battalion groups with tanks and everything else, but they're still going to be as garbage as the ones that we're seeing at the moment, which means that Ukraine has just got to hang on and fight and just keep destroying them until the system breaks. And how long that will be, I have no idea. But unless Putin actually sorts out his training system, the people he sends forward will just not be good enough to actually to deliver the programs and plans that he wants. I mean, as Dave will tell you, logistics is a serious academic subject. It's not something you can just do off the top of your head. You can't just send someone to do logistics. They're clueless about it. It's at least a master's degree subject to do properly on a battlefield, and better a PhD. And if you're just coming out of school and trying to logistics, and so Russia has got a major problem. They both got problems. Will still be on the Ukrainian problems out quicker than the Russians can actually improve. Dave, back me up.
Yeah, and that will continue to be Russia's problem, because they're not going to admit it. So you can't fix a problem when you don't admit you have one. I'm becoming increasingly less concerned on the Ukrainian side when it comes to training and logistics. It's still a challenge. It's still difficult. I have a feeling they're getting some help.
Yeah,
I have a feeling there's some good advisors in the right places, and that I get that feeling when I see M777s being employed on the battlefield correctly. They're firing with MET and good data. They've got good firing data because it's a precision artillery system and it's precise in its employment over the past week since they've arrived in the theater. That tells me there are advisors, right? I don't know where they're from. United States, Canada, Australia, Great Britain. There you go. Pick a combination thereof. The countries that use those systems. But there's people on the ground who are obviously, advising on how to work these systems and make it happen. Because it is, all right. You just don't figure that out overnight.
yeah.
But the Ukrainians are executing the system, right? They're receiving assistance in preparation and planning, but they're executing it. And that's how you learn. How to take this over and do it for yourself. So I'm feeling much better about Ukraine. Yeah, they have help, but they're executing it, and that's key.
Agreed.
Well, Glenn, we've got, like I said at the beginning, I've got a break because of my impending wedding and some travel getting back to Europe. But
Wedding.
yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to understand, Glenn, from you as we get into the summer, what's going to change on the ground? The Donbas offensive seems to be culminating in the next few weeks with the Russians getting whatever they get before they start putting on the back foot. What would you expect to see next from Ukraine's side? Because as Michael Kaufman said many times, this is really the last big offensive Russia has in them, and that at that point they need to be able to hold ground until they just keep it. Ukrainians tire themselves out or buy time to help Russia get more combat power from some kind of partial mobilization or shadow mobilization or some other way to raise manpower. It really looks like that's what's coming this summer is offensive season from a weather perspective, where maneuver is easier because of the weather with the ground being dried out, and Ukraine starting to have more and more equipment, whether it's the T-72s coming from Poland and Slovakia, or more artillery and drones and troops really who are being mobilized and trained since February 24th. Ben Hodges said something, and I want to kick this between both of you. Lieutenant General Hodges, he thinks it's feasible for Ukraine to reclaim most of their territory before 24 February by the end of the summer. And I just want to let both of you kick that around and see what you think about that.
I listened to that. I heard Ben Hodges say that. So, hey, he's a lieutenant general. He's a former United States Army Europe commanding general. He's had his finger on the pulse and seen the man behind the curtain. Is it possible? Yeah, I do concur with that, and the reason I do is I don't think Russia's able to reconstitute forces. I think the sanctions have crippled their industrial base. They continue to lie to themselves that this is a special military operation rather than a full-scale invasion of a neighboring country, and as such, they're not mobilizing the nation to conduct the large-scale combat operations. And on the flip side, on Ukraine's sides, so long as they continue to receive support from the West in terms of equipment, logistics, advisors, trainers, and they will be able to continue to push. And we're seeing, Russia getting smushed down on what they're really able to control. So they're just rolling it from north, south, southeast, and eventually something's going to have to give in that. I think it will take upwards of a year. 24 February of 23 might be a little optimistic, but I don't think it's that far off.
Glenn,
if conditions stay the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because the battlefield is completely different in different areas. I mean, we're not seeing I mean, if you go to the Second World War, then what you saw in the battlefield was a coherent thing, that it was pretty much the same. You could be fighting one place and you could be fighting somewhere else, and it would be the same. But here we've got 3 or 4 different battles. The north of Donbas and south of Kharkiv is definitely one clear battle area that they're trying to break through, and they're pushing big numbers. And this is just shit hard fighting. The soldier to soldier and nasty fighting, with losses on both sides. When you go down to Donbas, the Donbas area, then the guys, you're looking at the trench warfare still, the old trench warfare, and the guys are still in the trenches and they're defending from the trenches. Now, if you're talking about taking Donbas, then theoretically, these are the people that are supposed to do it, because they're the ones on the edge of Donbas. I just don't see them being able to get themselves out of the trenches and move from trench warfare to advanced operational warfare to take Donbas. So I'm not sure who is going to retake Donbas, because it's got to be someone with mobility. It's got to be someone that's actually a units that are happy fighting in in streets, because they're going to have to go into Donetsk.
I think Ben Hodges was talking about not getting into the Donbas, but everything that's been taken since 20.
Yeah, but then there's no war. There's no battle. I mean, that's a compromise that the people that are talking to me are not willing to accept. I mean, they want back to the borders, and if you're going to go back to the borders, you've got to take it back to the borders. Frankly, but go back 6 months, I'd have said the only people that could do it were Azov Battalion, because they were mentally geared for this sort of thing. They've been preparing themselves to take back the Donbas. But a lot of the other brigades, the trench warfare, especially this last 2 months, is going to give them a very heavy fixation, and to get out of the trenches and start moving forward. I mean, remember, go back to even when we had the first tanks, how long it took to change the mentality of people to different type of warfare. So you got a problem there with Donbas, and then south of this, where you could call it the terrorism area of the south of Kherson and areas. I mean, this is a completely different set of warfare there. But this, if you ask me, I would say this is the weakest area. This is where Russia is weakest, and this is where if they're going to attack and crush or break through, then this is where it's got to happen. But there are we've got 2 different types of warfare. What we call the mobile warfare, where you crack through, you encircle, and you capture, and then you've got this the current type of warfare that's going on, which is slow, deliberate killing. Just move forward a bit, move forward a village, break another village, fight, move forward another village. Well, if you're going to retake the whole of the area like this, that is going to take a long time. That is going to take a long time, unless Russia folds. Russia could fold in 24 hours. No question in my mind. If the Ukrainians press the right button, Russia will fold. I don't know what that right button is, but my suspicion is that it's the entrance to Crimea. That if they actually get close to the entrance to Crimea, everybody on the wrong side of Crimea is going to sweat and will start giving up quite quickly. I don't see that's the only thing that I see that is the big thing. I suppose the second thing then will be capturing Donetsk. That if they capture Donetsk and take that back, then there will be a fundamental change in the Russian forces in how they view everything, because they will think that then from that point they're losing. And what someone written, unless Putin uses a nuke on a city, Crimea can take back, so Ukraine can take back Crimea by July, which is what I think as well. But this nuke thing is the thing that it dominates so much of the thinking outside of Ukraine. And several of my friends who are Air Force types have said quite clearly, we don't need to go nuke if Russia nukes, because the quality of the American Air Force with F-35 and all the other air forces around are so much better than anything Russians got that they can actually destroy the Russian attack in a couple of days. And remembering the quality of the attack in Iraq for the first Gulf War, and just think that our air forces are a huge step better than they were then, and still they destroyed what was then the same type of aircraft and the same type of equipment as Russia's fighting with now. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for Ukraine to move forward, but if they just go village by village by village, it's going to take a long time, is my feeling. Dave, back me up or argue with me, mate.
Yeah, if Ukraine has to go into the cities, and that would assume that Russia would defend the cities first. I don't know. I don't know if they do.
The question is whether they can. Whether they've got
Right.
enough people to defend cities.
Or would they rather withdraw and rebel the cities on their way out?
That's a good question.
Which is, I think that's the more likely course of action for Russia. The rebel the cities as they withdraw out.
But if they start rebelling Donetsk, for example, then it's going to change the paradigm of how the separatists who are working there.
Yeah, it invalidates it.
I mean, it is entirely possible that they'll all just turn around and fight for Ukraine,
right?
Because they'll see that that what they were led to believe is actually complete garbage. Well, now we know this, but they just haven't actually got around to realizing it yet. But they would do if their own homes were destroyed. They could visibly see their own homes were being destroyed by Russia. Yeah. That would change that's a different paradigm altogether.
Yeah, and they're not losing in the Donbas yet.
No, they're not, but they're not winning either.
No, but they're not. Right, they're not losing there yet.
No.
I see it rolling in from the north towards the south, and eventually I think we're going to start moving west, east, and that Russian sphere is going to start shrinking into the Donbas. We're already seeing it come from the north down.
Yeah. Let's see. Could be an interesting summer.
Yeah. Well, Dave and Glenn, I'm
going to get married.
See, he brought it up and his camera froze.
Yes,
Yeah.
camera froze.
I'm going to be traveling over the next few weeks and looking forward to seeing you in person, Glenn. Dave, I already saw you here. And, hopefully seeing what happens, some of these things play out. I hope General Hodges is right. Glenn, if Ukraine can, get Crimea for the summer, that'd be great to visit. But I'm sure that's probably going to take a while.
2010, I was there last. It's a long time.
Well, my master's thesis was on Crimea, and I'm a little upset I can't visit it. But anyway, I'll have to get there one of these days.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Guys, thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for joining for another episode. I know I've enjoyed the regular conversations with you, Dave and Glenn. Look forward to reconnecting after my travels to have some follow-up conversations. And Glenn, keep your finger on the pulse from Europe there, and Dave, keep watching.
I shall try. And
hopefully we'll have coffee or a drink together in Kiev sooner than later, Glenn.
Hopefully. Okay, people. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Bye.
Okay. Ciao. Bye.
Control on the Russian side is to their decrement.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're just seeing now, just to temper what I'm hearing also from people that I know on the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian forces are taking a lot of casualties. This is a tough fight. The Russians have learned a lot from their original mistakes. They're moving very cautiously. They're trying to make up for the lack of manpower because of all the people they've lost with a lot of artillery. But ultimately, what's happening is the Ukrainian forces are still seem to be out fighting at the tactical level, the Russian forces, and are therefore able to win small tactical engagements that start to add up. And that's really the thing that seems to be happening right now. And you should see an acceleration of that with these new artillery systems that are just now getting onto the battlefield, and the acceleration of their integration with drones, which the Ukrainians seem to have become much better at, whether it's quantity of small commercial drones that they're getting, or some of the other higher level drones, Bayraktars and others. The Ukrainians definitely seem to be more adept at the way the fight's evolving. And that's why you're seeing such a big emphasis on these artillery pieces. Germany sending with Netherlands 12 of their self-propelled howitzers, the 2000s. Reconnecting after my travels to have some follow-up conversations. And Glenn, keep your finger on the pulse from Europe there, and Dave, keep watching.
I shall try.
And hopefully we'll have coffee or a drink together in Kiev sooner than later, Glenn.
Hopefully. Okay, people. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Bye.
Okay. Ciao. Bye.